The wind had dropped by evening, leaving the small-town police station steeped in a hush broken only by the creak of its old flagpole. Sergeant Ellen Kearney leaned against the doorway, rubbing at the tired ache in her wrists. It had been a day of paperwork, dull enough that her eyes kept drifting to the street where shadows stretched long across the pavement. She had almost turned back inside when something moved across the far curb. A small shape, hesitant, yet determined. It was a puppy, thin enough that its ribs caught the fading light. Its paws clicked softly against the stone steps, nails too, long, pads rough from wandering. Ellen froze, expecting the little stray to bolt at her presence, but instead it approached with a strange certainty as though guided by a scent only it could follow. Its fur was patchy, its gait unsteady, but in its mouth it carried something heavy. The object caught the light in a brief flicker of gold before dropping with a dull ring against the concrete. The sound startled her. She crouched, heart catching, in her chest. The puppy stood over the fallen object as though guarding it, its ears lowered but its tail giving a faint, uncertain wag. Ellen reached slowly, careful not to spook it, her fingers brushing grit from the metal surface. What she lifted was not the bottle cap or scrap she had expected, but a gold ring, its band scuffed, the design delicate. Inside the narrow circle was the faint impression of initials, nearly worn smooth by time. The puppy made a soft sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine. Its eyes, dark and glassy with hunger, followed her every motion. Ellen had handled evidence for 2 decades, but never had an item arrived like this, dropped at her feet by an animal too young to know the meaning of what it carried. She turned the ring in her palm, noticing how the setting had been bent slightly out of shape, as if torn free from a finger with sudden force. Around them, the street had grown quiet enough that even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade. The puppy shifted, then lay down against the stone step, panting softly, its chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Ellen felt the weight of the moment press against her, the odd union of chance and instinct. A stray, a gold ring, and a silence that hinted at unfinished stories. She pocketed the ring and looked once more at the animal. Its ribs fluttered with each breath, yet its eyes stayed fixed on the door behind her, as if it expected something within those walls to answer for the burden it had carried. Ellen shivered, though the air was still warm, a sense that the object she now held was less a clue than a demand. The puppy's gaze lingered on her with quiet insistence, as though the ring was not the end of what it had found, but only the beginning. The station's fluorescent lights hummed faintly as Ellen stepped inside, the puppy padding behind her with hesitant steps. The old floorboards echoed beneath her boots, each creak amplifying the stillness of the lobby. She set the gold ring gently on her desk blotter, its dull shine oddly out of place among the stacked reports and ink-stained forms. The puppy lingered by the threshold, nose twitching, ears lifting as though listening for sounds she could not hear. Ellen filled a shallow bowl with water from the sink and placed it on the floor. The pup approached cautiously, then drank in, ragged gulps, droplets glistening on its whiskers. When it lifted its head again, its gaze slid past her toward the far corridor where the evidence room stood locked behind a steel door. She felt a flicker of unease. The animal wasn't simply searching for food or warmth. It seemed fixed on something deeper, a pull that went beyond instinct. Outside, rain began in a light scatter against the windows, a thin drizzle that carried the smell of wet earth and rust. Ellen watched the water bead along the glass, each drop running in slow trails as though mirroring the uncertainty she felt. The station was nearly empty at this hour, her only company the echo of rain and the faint pant of the animal at her feet. She picked up the ring again, tilting it under the desk lamp. The initials, though faded, appeared clearer now. 2 letters that brushed against memory, uncomfortably familiar. The pup's posture shifted, ears flattening, body pressed low to the ground. It gave a low growl, not at her, but at the silence. beyond the corridor. Ellen stood, listening. At first she heard nothing but the rain, then a faint metallic rattle, like the distant shift of a chain dragged slowly across concrete. She knew the building well, and that sound didn't belong to any working fixture. Her hand moved instinctively to the ring, holding it tighter, as if the weight of it might steady her. The puppy crept toward the hallway, each step deliberate, claws clicking softly. Its frail body carried a tension that seemed borrowed from something larger, older. Ellen followed, her breath shallow, the rhythm of the rain outside matching the beat of her heart. The evidence room door loomed ahead, its surface scarred by years of use. A drop of water fell from the ceiling pipe and hit the concrete with a sharp tap, startling the pup into stillness. Ellen crouched, her knees stiff, and laid a hand on its back. The animal trembled beneath her touch but did not move away. Its head remained pointed toward the door, eyes dark and unblinking. She reached for the handle, then stopped. Something about the lock caught her attention. It bore fresh scratches, tiny grooves etched in arcs, as though forced open and hastily resealed. She straightened slowly, the ring still in her hand. A thought pressed at the edge of her mind. Perhaps what the dog had carried here was not a beginning, but a fragment of something already set in motion. The rain outside thickened, drumming harder against the roof, filling the air with a muted roar. Within that sound, Ellen thought she heard another, faint, human, perhaps a voice muffled through walls. She turned toward the puppy, whose ribs rose sharply with every breath, its gaze never wavering from the door. Ellen hesitated. Protocol demanded she call it in, wait for backup, treat the evidence by the book. But the station was empty. The storm had cut the lines more than once before, and the animal's unrelenting fixation gnawed at her reason. With a steadying breath, she slid the ring into her coat pocket and placed her hand firmly on the handle. Yurr! Puppy pressed itself closer to her boot, not in fear, but as though bracing for what lay beyond. The ring lay on the evidence table, its gold dulled beneath the harsh fluorescent light. Ellen had left it there, unable to shake the feeling that it belonged not to the chain of custody, but to something older, more personal. She turned away from it, though, when the sound of claws against tile drew her attention. The puppy had slipped past the threshold, its small frame weaving between the chairs of the waiting room, leaving faint paw smudges on the clean floor. It moved with an odd urgency, nose pressed low, trailing some invisible thread. Ellen followed without calling out, her breath tight in her chest. The puppy stopped at the hallway's end, right before the evidence lockers, and scratched once, twice, then sat. Its posture was not of a lost animal seeking comfort. It was patient, as if waiting for recognition. A low rumble of thunder rolled outside. The storm had been promised all week, but it was only now that the air turned heavy enough to press against the lungs. Rain began in thin threads against the window, each streak distorting the glow of the street lamps beyond. Ellen felt the syncopation of her heartbeat with the weather. Uneven, uncertain. The puppy licked its paw, then winced, pulling the leg back close to its chest. Ellen knelt, her knees popping against the hard floor. Under the animal's weight, the paw was raw, a nail cracked deep at the base. She touched near it, not daring closer, and the pup froze. Head tilted. It did not growl or snap. Instead, it exhaled, long and shaky, as if tired of resisting. Ellen whispered nothing. She had learned long ago that animals trusted silence more than voices. She rose and returned with a shallow bowl of water, setting it down without ceremony. The puppy drank as though it had been searching for this single act all day, its tongue, quick and desperate, the sound of it filling the empty station. Outside, the drizzle thickened into a steady rain, tapping the glass like a metronome for the moment's strange rhythm. When the bowl was empty, the puppy walked back toward the evidence table. It did not leap or bark. It simply placed itself beneath the steel legs, curling close, eyes half shut but alert. Ellen felt her skin prickle. The ring above the pup was not just an object any longer. It had become a hinge between two silences, one belonging to the animal, and one to whatever human hand had last worn the gold. The phone rang once at her desk, its shrill tone breaking the stillness. She let it ring until the machine took over. She couldn't lift her eyes from the animal's vigil. Somewhere in the distance, the thunder cracked sharper, rattling the window panes. The puppy's ears flicked, but it did not move. By the time Ellen finally reached for the ring again, her fingers shook. She turned it until the faint engraving caught the light. She had thought it initials before, but under the right angle, the etching looked more like numbers, worn almost flat. Not a name, not a mark of love, but something else. Coordinates, perhaps, or a date left incomplete. The puppy stirred, as if the shift of her attention had pulled it from half-sleep. Its eyes followed her hand. Ellen placed the ring back down, but not in its tray. She set it directly on the table's edge, closer to the dog's line of sight. The gesture felt reckless, even absurd, yet she couldn't shake the sense that the object and the animal were linked by more than chance. Rain hammered harder now, a sheet of sound drumming the roof, filling the hollowness between them. Ellen turned off the overhead light, leaving only the desk lamp's warm pool across the metal. The shadows deepened, and in the dimness, the puppy's outline blurred against the floor, more presence than form. It lifted its head, ears twitching, at something beyond her perception. Perhaps a noise outside, perhaps only the shift of weather. Then, with quiet resolve, it rose and padded toward the door. Its limp slowed it, but it did not hesitate. Ellen's hand brushed the radio on her belt, then fell away. She didn't call after it. She only watched as the pup pressed its nose to the glass of the station entrance, waiting. Not to leave, but to be let out. The decision hung there, suspended between them like the storm's weight. If she opened the door, she knew it would not simply vanish into the night. It was leading her somewhere, pulling her into a story she hadn't meant to touch. Yet the air carried the taste of inevitability, metallic and sharp. She reached for the keys. The clink of metal was swallowed by the rain, but the puppy's body stiffened, tail low, gaze fixed outward as though a shape were already forming in the darkness beyond the threshold. Ellen hesitated, palm against the cold glass, the faint reflection of her own weary face staring back. On the other side, the puppy waited, patient yet insistent, as if the next step, her step, would break open what neither of them could retreat from. The rain had settled into a fine mist, threading silver over the street lamps and pooling in. The grooves of the old station steps. Ellen pulled her collar higher, the damp working its way into her bones. The puppy, too thin, too young to be carrying the kind of weight it had, trembled against her boot. Its breath came ragged, each inhale carrying a faint hitch, as though pain sat lodged deep within its ribs. She crouched, running her hand lightly along its flank. Beneath the matted fur, her fingers met a welt, the edges raw as if barbed wire had once cut and held. The pup flinched but didn't pull away, its eyes fixed not on her, but on the darkened street beyond. Something in its stillness unsettled. Her, a patience that didn't belong to an animal this young. From the pocket of her coat, the ring pressed its circle into her palm. She turned it once, catching the faint engraving against the glow of the station light. L.R. The initials meant nothing at first, but the moment felt as if it waited for her to name them. Rain tapped against the glass door behind her, steady, insistent. Then the puppy moved. With sudden resolve, it limped forward, claws clicking against the wet pavement. Ellen followed, boots striking softly in rhythm with its uneven gait. They passed shuttered shop fronts down the lane where the gutters coughed with rainwater. The night deepened, yet the animal pressed on, tail low, pausing only to glance back at her, eyes shining with the reflection of passing headlights. They stopped at the edge of a vacant lot. Chain-link fencing sagged inward, patched with mismatched Wire, the kind that told of hurried repairs. On the other side, earth lay bare and churned, a half-forgotten strip of ground where weeds bent low under the drizzle. Ellen's breath caught. The soil was streaked with darker patches, uneven as if disturbed by more than rain. The pup nosed at the lowest gap in the fence, whining softly, then sat back on its haunches. Its posture wasn't expectant. It was waiting. Ellen felt a tension she couldn't name draw the air tighter. She pressed her hand against the fence, the metal damp and cold. Behind her, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. She turned. A man in a dark raincoat stood just beyond the halo of a street lamp, his face indistinct, but his stance too still to be a passer-by. His gaze was not on her. It was fixed on the puppy. The pup's ears flattened, body shrinking low to the ground. Ellen straightened, every nerve alert, the ring a hard weight now clutched between her fingers. The man didn't speak, didn't move closer, only lifted a hand in a gesture she couldn't read, warning, recognition, or dismissal. The mist swallowed him, leaving only the echo of his presence in the hush of dripping branches. Ellen's pulse slowed, though unease clung sharp in her throat. She looked down at the puppy whose gaze had not shifted from the torn earth inside the fence. Its body was taut, waiting. The rain softened, leaving silence more hollow than before. She reached for the fence latch, fingers hovering, the choice heavy in its simplicity. If she crossed, there would be no turning back. The puppy shifted once more, pressing its nose to the wire, eyes unblinking. And in that stillness, Ellen knew. The ring had not been the only thing carried to her doorstep. The gate gave way with a muted groan, its hinges swollen with rust and weather. Ellen stepped inside, her boots sinking into the soft, uneven ground. The drizzle had slowed, leaving beads of water clinging to the wire fence and the weeds that lined the lot. The puppy slipped through behind her, its small body brushing damp against her calf as though needing to feel that she hadn't vanished into the darkness. Ahead, the soil was torn in long streaks, shallow ridges where spades had cut, then been hurriedly covered. She crouched at the edge of one patch and pressed her hand against the earth. It was not fresh, but it was not old either. The rain had begun to smooth the edges, but the disturbance was still clear. A ring slipped from a finger could have been, lost anywhere, but this was different. This was ground where something had been hidden, and hastily. She stayed crouched for a long moment, listening to the soft panting beside her and the distant hum of tires on wet asphalt. The dog nudged its nose against her wrist. Not insistence, not demand, just a touch, as though grounding her. Ellen turned her hand so the ring pressed again into her palm. Its initials were faint but not erased, the traces of a name someone once thought enough to wear daily. She realized then that what the puppy had carried to her door had not been meant as evidence in the way she had understood it. It had not brought her a case to solve, but a silence to acknowledge. When the stranger in the rain had lingered by the lamplight, she had felt only suspicion. Now, standing within the hollow of the lot, she felt something else, the sharp edge of recognition. Whoever he was, he had come not to threaten, but to bear. Witness, as though he too was bound by what had been buried here. That presence had not been warning her away, but asking her to understand. The puppy pawed lightly at the ground, claws pulling small rivulets in the wet earth. Ellen reached down, touching its spine gently. There was no urgency in the movement, no desperate cry for rescue. It was as though the animal was showing her a truth it did not fully understand itself, a truth it had carried in instinct alone. Perhaps it had belonged to someone who had worn the ring. Perhaps it had only wandered and found it, lifting it like any fragment of food or cloth. The chain of meaning was fragile, but the gesture undeniable. She breathed out slowly, the air damp and cool against her throat. This was not about reopening files or combing records, though she knew she would. This was about recognizing the quiet bonds that linger long after people are gone. The conflict had never been between her and the evidence, or between the station and the unknown man in the rain. It had been her own instinct to categorize, to solve, to force the world into the neatness of a report. But the puppy had reminded her that some things come not to be solved, but to be carried, acknowledged and then set down gently. The pup circled once, then curled against the base of the fence. Its sides rose and fell with uneven rhythm, but its posture was calm now, as though it had delivered what it needed to. Ellen stood above it, listening to the water drip steadily from the corners of the fence posts. The town around her had settled into its night rhythms. Doors locked, curtains drawn, the ordinary quiet of people who believed nothing stirred beyond their walls. And yet here, in this small forgotten lot, the ground itself seemed to hold memory, not as a scream, but as a hum beneath the soil. Ellen turned the ring one last time, then closed her hand over it. She would log it, yes, and the file would open. But more than that, she would remember that its path had not begun in the neatness of a desk drawer, but in the mouth of a stray whose ribs showed through its fur. That was the truth the conflict had hidden from her, that not all evidence is about guilt or innocence. Sometimes it is about loyalty, about the way even the most fragile creature can become the keeper of what others wish forgotten. The drizzle faded, leaving the lot washed in a pale, thin moonlight. The puppy lifted its head once, eyes catching the light, then lowered it again with a weary sigh. Ellen felt a shift within herself, a quiet release of the rigid certainty that had once defined her work. She understood now that transformation does not come in a single moment of revelation, but in the slow erosion of assumptions, like rain softening the edges of a graveled path. She stayed until the night deepened fully, until the street lamps flickered against thinning mist. Then she turned back toward the station, the puppy trailing at her heel. It did not walk with the urgency of before. It simply followed, as if its part was finished. At the edge of the lot she paused, looking back once. The disturbed earth was only shadows now, the fence a line between past and present. She thought of the man in the rain, and wondered if he too had walked away with the same weight pressing lightly but permanently in his chest. On the station steps, she hesitated. The puppy stopped beside her, its gaze fixed not on the building but on the empty street beyond. For a brief moment she thought it might slip away, back into the night it had come from. Instead, it sat, paws neatly placed, body still but alert. The choice lingered in the air like the scent of rain, to stay, to leave, to carry forward, or to let go. Ellen placed the ring gently on her desk later, but she did not file it right away. She left it in the open, the metal catching fragments of lamplight from the window. Outside, the wind stirred faintly, lifting dry leaves across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance a train sounded its horn, the echo rolling low across the valley, fading, then gone. The puppy dozed on a blanket she had folded near the radiator. Its body twitched occasionally in dream, paws flexing against some remembered chase. Ellen watched it for a long while, her hand resting lightly on the desk, the ring cool beneath her fingertips. She understood now that the story it had carried, to her, would never be whole, not in the way a case file is whole. But perhaps wholeness was not the point. Perhaps the point was the act of carrying itself, the way even a fragment, even an animal with no words, could insist on remembrance. When she finally turned off the lamp, the room fell into the quiet hum of night. The puppy stirred, lifted its head once, then settled again, as if acknowledging the end of a long journey. Outside, the last of the rain had dried, leaving only the faint shimmer of damp on the road, the trace of something past and not returning. The world would move on in its ordinary rhythm, but the image remained fixed in Ellen's mind. A stray pausing on the steps of a station, jaws parting to release a ring that should have been lost forever. It was not drama, not spectacle, just the quiet insistence of memory, carried from one life into another. And in the silence of the emptied lot, the wind moved across the disturbed soil, lifting its edges softly until it looked again like any other ground.